Hi! You're living in a world shaped by a man most people have never heard of. Every time you unlock your phone with your fingerprint, send a secure message, or ask Siri a question, you're using ideas that came from one brilliant mind. A mind that cracked the uncrackable, built the unbuildable, and imagined the unimaginable. But here's the crazy part. He did all of this while the world was literally falling apart around him. This is the story of Alan Turing, and trust me, by the end of this series, you'll realize that pretty much everything you interact with on a daily basis exists because of what this guy figured out in his short, tragic, and absolutely extraordinary life. Now, you might be thinking, oh great, another boring history lesson about some old mathematician. But hold on, because this isn't just history. This is the origin story of our digital world. The smartphone in your pocket, the Wi-Fi you're using right now, the algorithms that decide what you see on social media, the encryption that keeps your bank account safe, artificial intelligence, machine learning, even the very concept of computation itself. All of it traces back to ideas that came from one man's head between 1912 and 1954. And here's what's absolutely mind-blowing. Turing didn't just contribute to these fields, he basically invented them. From scratch, while most people were still figuring out how radios worked, this guy was designing the theoretical foundation for computers that wouldn't exist for decades. But before we dive into the technical wizardry, let me paint you a picture of just how revolutionary this man was. Imagine if one person invented the wheel, discovered electricity, and figured out how to split the atom, all while writing the instruction manual for how future civilizations should think about problem solving. That's basically what Turing did, except instead of wheels and electricity, he was dealing with computation, artificial intelligence, and mathematical logic. The story begins in 1912, when little Alan Matheson Turing was born into a world that had no idea what was coming. While other kids were playing with toy soldiers, young Alan was already showing signs of the kind of brain that comes along maybe once in a century. By age 6, he was teaching himself to read. By 13, he was conducting chemistry experiments that his teachers couldn't understand. And by 16, he was already grappling with Einstein's theory of relativity and coming up with his own insights about the nature of space and time. But here's where it gets interesting. Turing wasn't just smart in that boring textbook kind of way. He was smart in a way that let him see patterns and possibilities that literally nobody else could see. While his classmates were memorizing facts, Turing was asking questions that wouldn't be formally posed by the scientific community for another 20 years. His professors at King's College, Cambridge quickly realized they had something special on their hands. This wasn't just another brilliant student. This was someone who thought about mathematics and logic in completely new ways. While traditional mathematicians were focused on solving existing problems, Turing was busy inventing entirely new types of problems that nobody had even thought to ask yet. And then, in 1936, at the tender age of 24, Turing published a paper that would literally change everything. It was called Uncomputable Numbers with an Application to the Entscheidungsproblem. Now, I know that sounds like the most boring title in the history of academic papers, but trust me when I say that this paper basically laid the groundwork for every piece of technology you've ever used. In this paper, Turing introduced something called a Turing machine. Now, this wasn't an actual machine you could touch. It was a thought experiment, a mathematical concept that described what it would mean for something to be computable. Basically, Turing asked a simple question. What does it actually mean to calculate something? Think about that for a second. Before Turing, people just kind of assumed they knew what calculation meant. You add numbers, you solve equations, you follow mathematical rules. But Turing wanted to understand the fundamental nature of computation itself. What are the absolute basic steps that any calculation must involve? What's the simplest possible machine that could, in theory, perform any calculation that could ever be performed? His answer was elegant and revolutionary. He imagined a machine with a tape that could be divided into squares, each containing a symbol. The machine could read these symbols, write new ones and move along the tape according to a set of rules. That's it, just reading, writing, and moving. But here's the kicker. Turing proved that any problem that could be solved by any computer, ever, could also be solved by this incredibly simple theoretical machine. This might not sound like a big deal, but it was absolutely massive. Turing had just defined the theoretical limits of computation itself. He'd answered the question of what could and couldn't be calculated, not just with the technology of his time, but with any technology that would ever exist. He'd basically written the Constitution for the digital age, 30 years before the digital age began. But the implications went way beyond just mathematics. Turing's work suggested something profound about the nature of thought itself. If human reasoning could be broken down into logical steps, and if those steps could be performed by a machine, then maybe consciousness and computation weren't as different as people assumed. And here's where Turing's story takes a dramatic turn. Because just as he was developing these revolutionary ideas about computation and mechanical thinking, the world exploded into the most devastating conflict in human history. World War II had begun, and suddenly, this brilliant young mathematician found himself recruited into one of the most secretive and important projects of the entire war. The British government had a problem. The German military was using something called the Enigma machine to encode all of their communications. This wasn't just any code. The Enigma machine could generate about 159 quintillion different possible settings. To put that in perspective, if you tried one setting every second, it would take you longer than the age of the universe to try them all. The German military was convinced that Enigma was unbreakable. They were so confident in this belief that they used it for everything. Battle plans, troop movements, supply logistics, submarine coordinates. If the Allies could crack Enigma, they could essentially read Germany's mind. But if they couldn't, well, the war might be lost before it really began. Enter Alan Turing. The same mind that had just revolutionized our understanding of computation was now tasked with doing something that seemed impossible, breaking a code that the smartest cryptographers in the world had declared uncrackable. Working at a top-secret facility called Bletchley Park, Turing and a team of brilliant codebreakers began attacking the Enigma problem. But here's what made Turing special. While everyone else was trying to solve the problem using traditional cryptography methods, Turing approached it like a computation problem. He didn't just want to crack individual messages, he wanted to build machines that could crack messages automatically. This is where Turing's earlier theoretical work became absolutely crucial. He understood, better than anyone else alive, what it would take to mechanize the process of logical reasoning. He could envision machines that didn't just follow instructions, but machines that could adapt, learn, and solve problems dynamically. The result was a series of electromechanical devices called bombs. These machines weren't computers in the modern sense, but they were the first programmable machines designed to solve logical problems automatically. They could test thousands of possible Enigma settings in a fraction of the time it would take human codebreakers, and it worked. Against all odds, Turing and his team cracked Enigma, but breaking Enigma was just the beginning. You see, while Turing was busy saving civilization, he was also laying the groundwork for something even more revolutionary. The machines he built at Bletchley Park weren't just code-breaking devices. They were the first glimpse of what would eventually become the modern computer. Think about it. Here's a guy who had already figured out the theoretical foundations of computation, and now he was actually building physical machines that could perform logical operations automatically. He was essentially prototyping the future, one gear and wire at a time. The impact was immediate and staggering. Historians estimate that cracking Enigma shortened World War II by at least 2 years and saved millions of lives. But here's the part that'll blow your mind. Almost nobody knew about it. The work at Bletchley Park was so secret that it wasn't declassified until the 1970s. For decades, one of the most important achievements in human history was completely hidden from public view. So while the world was celebrating the end of the war, Turing was already thinking about what came next. He'd proven that machines could perform logical reasoning. But what if they could do more than just follow predetermined rules? What if they could actually think? This is where Turing's story gets really wild. In 1945, before most people had even seen a computer, Turing was already designing one of the first stored program computers. It was called the Automatic Computing Engine, or ACE, and it was decades ahead of its time. Most people were still thinking about computers as giant calculators. You'd feed them a problem, they'd crunch some numbers, and they'd spit out an answer. But Turing saw something completely different. He envisioned machines that could store their own instructions, modify those instructions on the fly, and essentially reprogram themselves to solve new types of problems. This wasn't just an engineering breakthrough, it was a conceptual revolution. Turing was proposing that the same machine could be a calculator 1 minute, a chess player the next, and a language translator after that. All it needed was different software. But here's what makes this even more impressive. Turing wasn't just designing the hardware. He was inventing the entire concept of software. He was figuring out how to make machines that could learn, adapt, and evolve their own behavior based on experience. And then, in 1950, Turing dropped another bombshell. He published a paper called Computing Machinery and Intelligence, and it started with a question that still haunts computer scientists today. Can machines think? Now, most people would have approached this as a philosophical question. They would have gotten lost in debates about consciousness and the nature of thought. But Turing, being Turing, cut straight through all the abstract nonsense and proposed something brilliantly practical. Instead of arguing about whether machines could really think, why not just test whether they could convince humans that they were thinking? He proposed a simple test. Put a human in one room and a machine in another room. Let a human judge ask questions to both through a text interface. If the judge couldn't tell which responses came from the human and which came from the machine, then for all practical purposes, the machine was thinking. This became known as the Turing test, and it's still the gold standard for artificial intelligence research today. Every chatbot, every voice assistant, every AI system is essentially trying to pass some version of the test that Turing dreamed up 70 years ago. But Turing didn't stop there. He started thinking about how machines might actually learn to think. He proposed that instead of trying to program adult-level intelligence from scratch, maybe we should try to create machine minds that could learn and develop like children. He imagined machines that would start with basic capabilities and then improve through experience, trial and error, and interaction with their environment. Sound familiar? That's basically the foundation of modern machine learning and neural networks. While other researchers were trying to hard-code intelligence into machines, Turing was proposing that intelligence might emerge naturally from simple learning mechanisms. He was describing artificial neural networks decades before anyone had the technology to build them. And here's the thing that's absolutely mind-blowing. Turing was doing all of this theoretical work on artificial intelligence while simultaneously working on practical computer engineering problems. He wasn't just a theorist sitting in an ivory tower. He was getting his hands dirty building actual machines. At the National Physical Laboratory and later at the University of Manchester, Turing was involved in designing and programming some of the world's first electronic computers. He was writing some of the first computer programs, debugging some of the first software bugs, and solving some of the first computational problems that had never been attempted before. But Turing's interests went far beyond just computers and artificial intelligence. This guy's brain was like a curiosity machine that couldn't be turned off. He started getting fascinated by biology, specifically by the question of how living organisms develop their complex patterns and structures. In the early 1950s, Turing began working on what would become known as morphogenesis, the study of how biological forms emerge during development. He wanted to understand how a fertilized egg could grow into something as complex as a human being, with all its intricate patterns and structures. His approach was, predictably, revolutionary. Instead of just describing biological patterns, Turing created mathematical models that could actually generate those patterns. He proposed that simple chemical reactions, following basic rules of diffusion and interaction, could spontaneously create the complex patterns we see in nature. Tiger stripes, leopard spots, the spiral patterns on shells, the arrangement of leaves on a stem. Turing showed that all of these could emerge from simple mathematical processes. He was essentially discovering the hidden algorithms that nature uses to create beauty and complexity. This work laid the foundation for what we now call computational biology and bioinformatics. Today, scientists use Turing's ideas to understand everything from how tumors grow to how ecosystems evolve. His mathematical models are used in designing new drugs, understanding genetic diseases, and even predicting the spread of epidemics. But perhaps most remarkably, Turing was starting to see connections between all of his different areas of research. He realized that computation, intelligence, and biological development might all be different manifestations of the same underlying principles. He was beginning to envision a unified theory of information processing that could explain how brains think, how computers calculate, how organisms develop, and how evolution creates complexity. He was seeing patterns that connected the digital world he was helping to create with the biological world that had created him. And this is where Turing's story becomes both triumphant and tragic. Because just as he was reaching the peak of his intellectual powers, just as he was beginning to see how all the pieces fit together, the world he had helped save turned against him in the most cruel and senseless way imaginable: Abel. In 1952, just as Turing was making breakthrough after breakthrough in multiple fields simultaneously, his personal life collided with the harsh realities of a society that wasn't ready for his brilliance or his humanity. You see, Turing was gay, and in 1950s, Britain, that wasn't just socially unacceptable, it was illegal. Now, here's the thing that makes this story so infuriating. This was the same man who had literally saved Western civilization. The same brain that had cracked the uncrackable codes and designed the theoretical foundation for every piece of technology you're using right now was being persecuted by the very society he had protected. The irony is staggering. Turing had spent years keeping Britain's most important secrets, working in complete anonymity to protect his country's security. But when his private life became public knowledge after a break-in at his home, suddenly this war hero was treated like a criminal. The British government gave him a choice: prison or chemical castration through hormone treatments. Think about that for a second. The man who had invented the concept of artificial intelligence was being forced to undergo treatments that would fundamentally alter his brain chemistry. The same mind that had revolutionized mathematics, computer science, cryptography, and biology was being chemically modified by bureaucrats who couldn't even understand his work. Turing chose the hormone treatments, probably because he wanted to continue his research, but the effects were devastating. The chemicals didn't just affect him physically, they altered his mental state, his energy levels, his ability to think clearly. Imagine forcing Einstein to do physics while heavily sedated, or making Mozart compose symphonies while his hearing was deliberately damaged. But here's what's absolutely remarkable about Turing's character. Even under these horrific circumstances, he kept working. Even as his body and mind were being systematically damaged by the treatment, he continued pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. During this period, he was still developing his ideas about morphogenesis, still refining his theories about machine intelligence, still correspondence with researchers around the world about the future of computation. His letters from this time show a man who refused to let persecution destroy his intellectual curiosity. He was also becoming increasingly interested in the philosophical implications of his work. Turing was starting to ask big questions about consciousness, free will, and the nature of reality itself. If machines could think, and if biological development followed algorithmic rules, what did that say about human consciousness? Were we just biological computers running incredibly sophisticated software? These weren't just abstract philosophical musings. Turing was trying to understand something fundamental about what it means to exist, to be conscious, to have thoughts and feelings. He was approaching these ancient questions with the same mathematical rigor he'd applied to breaking Enigma and designing computers. and he was starting to see disturbing parallels between the deterministic nature of computation and the apparent determinism of physical and biological processes. If everything followed rules, if every thought and feeling could theoretically be predicted by sufficiently powerful calculations, then what happened to concepts like choice, creativity, and individual agency? And that's the ultimate tragedy of Alan Turing's story. Just as he was grappling with the deepest questions about consciousness and computation, just as he was on the verge of insights that might have accelerated human understanding by decades, his life was cut short. On June 7, 1954, at the age of just 41, Turing was found dead in his home. The official cause was cyanide poisoning, ruled a suicide, though some historians still debate whether it was accidental. Think about what we lost that day. Not just a brilliant mathematician or gifted computer scientist, but a mind that was uniquely capable of seeing connections across disciplines that nobody else could even imagine. Turing died just as the computer age was beginning, just as his theoretical work was starting to become practical reality. But here's the thing that would probably amaze Turing if he could see our world today. His ideas didn't die with him. Every algorithm powering your social media feed, every encryption protocol protecting your online transactions, every artificial intelligence system learning to recognize faces or translate languages, every biological simulation helping to develop new medicines. All of it traces back to concepts that Turing developed in his brief but extraordinary life. The smartphone you're holding right now is essentially a Turing machine. The internet you're using is built on cryptographic principles he helped establish. The AI systems that are starting to pass versions of the Turing test are following learning principles he outlined 70 years ago. Even the mathematical models scientists use to understand how patterns form in nature are based on equations he derived while being chemically tortured by his own government. In a very real sense, Alan Turing didn't just change the world. He created the intellectual foundation for the world we're living in today. Every time you interact with digital technology, you're experiencing the materialization of ideas that came from one man's extraordinary mind during one of the darkest periods in human history. And maybe that's the most important lesson from Turing's story. Genius isn't just about being smart, it's about seeing possibilities that others can't see, asking questions that others won't ask, and having the courage to pursue ideas even when the world isn't ready for them. Turing imagined thinking machines decades before we had the technology to build them. He envisioned a world where computation and biology and intelligence were all part of the same grand pattern. He saw the digital future while living in an analog world, and he had the brilliance to start building the bridge between them. So the next time you unlock your phone, send a secure message, or ask a virtual assistant a question, take a moment to remember Alan Turing. Remember that the digital world we take for granted exists because one extraordinary mind refused to accept the limitations of his time and dared to imagine what seemed impossible. In the end, maybe that's how we honor his legacy, by refusing to accept limitations, by asking questions that seem too big to answer, and by having the courage to imagine futures that others think are impossible. Because if Turing's story teaches us anything, it's that today's impossibility is often tomorrow's reality, and the future belongs to those brave enough to dream it into existence. So that's everything Alan Turing did to change the world. But honestly, this is just the beginning. Because understanding Turing's work opens up questions about consciousness, computation, and the nature of intelligence that we're still trying to answer today. Questions that might determine whether artificial intelligence becomes humanity's greatest achievement or its final invention.